Hello, and welcome to Istanbul Policy Center's podcast series, NATO in Türkiye, a podcast on all things NATO and Türkiye around the Alliance's Ankara summit. I'm Megan Gisclon, managing editor and researcher at Istanbul Policy Center, and today I have Ambassador Hüseyin Diriöz and Arda Mevlütoğlu with me to discuss the key takeaways from the Ankara summit. Though my guests need no introduction, especially since they've already been on the podcast before, still let me briefly introduce them for any new viewers. Ambassador Hüseyin Diriöz is a retired career diplomat who served for over 40 years in Turkey's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. During his career, he served in several positions within NATO, most notably as Assistant Secretary General for Defense Policy and Planning, and as Turkey's ambassador to Jordan, Brazil, and Russia. He is currently the president of the Foreign Policy Institute in Ankara. Arda Mevlütoğlu is an aerospace and defense sector executive with more than 20 years of professional experience in Turkey's defense industry. He is the founder and CEO of Mergen Analytical Strategies, working at the intersection of defense, technology, and strategy. He is currently pursuing a doctorate in the field of public policy at Middle East Technical University. Thank you both so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Megan. Nice to be here.
Thank you very much, Megan.
Thank you both again. So let's get started then with the questions. Let's start with Ambassador Diriöz. In our last podcast episode with you, you said that a signal of unity would make for a successful NATO summit. Did we get a strong enough signal of unity at the Ankara summit to call it a success?
The short answer is yes. I think that the summit has sent a strong signal of unity, particularly given the complex security environment that the alliance is facing. Allies demonstrated a shared commitment to collective defense, Article 5 especially, agreed on key priorities, reaffirmed that NATO remains united in addressing both the current and emerging security challenges. Of course, NATO is an alliance of sovereign democracies, so differences of opinions between members is natural. The real measure of unity is not the absence of debate, actually, but the ability to reach consensus on strategic objectives, strategic priorities, and translate that consensus into concrete decisions. In that respect, I believe the summit was successful. Of course, initially there was worry about the success of the summit. Critical remarks on allies, increasing dissonance in transatlantic relations, both sides of Atlantic, possibility that President Trump would not attend the summit. There was rumors as well. But President Trump arrived in Ankara, and there was increasing optimism about the success of the summit. But just before the summit, he had a press conference where he had rather harsh words on Greenland or Spain, etc. So again, there was some doubts. But then came the summit meeting, and important communique came out, actually. We can talk about that, the declaration, summit declaration. But actually, President Trump himself said after the meeting, actual meeting, summit meeting, he said that love is in the air. And as you know, there's a 1979 song by John Paul Young. The song is Love is in the Air. So, so love was in the air. And so it was, I think, it was successful, but it's important that even though the summit was a success, it is important to maintain and nurture that success and that unity. So that's how I see. Of course, NATO commitments to strengthen defense investment, enhance readiness, support innovation, reinforce alliances, defense and deterrence and defense posture, all reflected a common understanding of the challenges ahead. So, there was greater recognition of importance of resilience and sustained political commitment to the alliance objectives. So, no summit resolves the issues between the allies, all of them, or eliminates the differences. But the overall message from Ankara was one of cohesion, resolve, shared determination to adapt to an increasingly unpredictable security environment. That unity itself is a strategic asset and an important outcome of the Ankara summit, if I may say so.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Ambassador Diriöz. And I won't ask you to sing Love is in the Air, even though I am very tempted to. So another time, perhaps. But thank you most importantly for analyzing, of course, the unity is, of course, in the NATO, in the sense of NATO is reaching the consensus, not necessarily resolving every single one of the points of dispute, tension between every single ally. Of course, that's impossible. So, I mean, let's say is a more realistic perspective. So, thank you, of course, for that and your take on the NATO summit unity. Let's move to Arda. A question for you. Although a lot of the ink is still drying on many of the deals that were made during NATO's Defense Industry Forum in Ankara, can we conclude whether the summit was a success for Turkey and its defense industry?
Well, I believe there are two different successes or success parameters there. One is maybe short term, the other one is a longer term success. For the shorter term, the event, the NATO summit, was obviously a very important opportunity for Turkish defense industry to showcase its products, technology, and vision to allied nations and their decision makers, their industry leaders, their prominent figures. So the Defense Industry Forum was successfully conducted. There had been many exhibitions, shows, B2G and B2B meetings. And in that case, Turkish defense industry had very successfully and clearly presented itself to the alliance, its capabilities, its offerings, its position and vision. So in that sense, for the shorter term version of the success definition, yes, the summit had been a success. That is without question. For the longer term, we should be observing the outcomes. So Turkish defense industry has a very wide spectrum of solutions, products, and capabilities, which many of them directly address European defense and security requirements, industrial requirements, and military requirements. So Turkish defense industry is obviously the leading candidate for many different types of collaboration and partnership programs and meeting and addressing European security challenges. If the summit and the accompanying defense industry forum can be a catalyst for Turkish defense industry to turn these initial contacts, these showcases, into partnerships, into deals, agreements, memorandum of understandings, contracts, into solid and tangible outcomes, then we can also say that the Defense Industry Forum as well as the summit was a success for the Turkish defense industry, but it will obviously take some time. The initial signals are encouraging, initial signals are good, but it is up to Turkish defense industry professionals, executives, as well as government to sustain this momentum and turn it into a success story. It takes two to tango, of course. The capabilities, willingness, and motivation of Turkey and Turkish defense industry alone themselves are not required. Of course, we also need a willingness to establish and sustain a partnership by the other side of the table. Also, there are also good for that. There are good developments with Italy, Spain, UK, to name a few. And I think the future prospects for Turkish defense industry to increase its footstep in the European part of the NATO ecosystem is good. But again, it will take some time and some effort by both sides, of course.
Okay, great. So promising, but we have to keep the momentum going. Which, I
Definitely.
mean, of course, these are very slow processes. So something, kind of the, let's say, normal answer, if we can say so. So, I mean, that's good. Everything is on its way, it sounds, for
Yeah.
NATO to deliver at least. So, all right, going back to Ambassador Diriöz, a question for you regarding the outcomes of the summit. There's been a lot of criticism about the length of the summit communique. Of course, it is very short. That is the main criticism. Do you think that the Ankara Summit Declaration set a clear strategic direction for the alliance in the coming years, or did it leave anything out that's important for the alliance to measure?
Yes, you are right. The communique was shorter than many previous communiques, but no less important. I would highlight that. My overall takeaway from the communique is like this, if I may say so. Uh, Summit Declaration, it most importantly reaffirmed the Article 5, meaning collective defense and solidarity. Stronger defense investment was throughout not only the declaration, but also throughout the meeting. Plus, other documents were also agreed. Sometimes during the summits, not only the declaration, but other documents that are adapted are also important. And in this case, it was. Expansion of defense industry, that was important, especially from Turkey's perspective, the highlighting the need for removing barriers on defense trade between allies. That was also quite important, I would say. Modernizing NATO capabilities, a greater European responsibility, as you know, this was already in the coming, and because of the debate between two sides of Atlantic, but it was mentioned as a stronger Europe within NATO, or a stronger Europe in a stronger NATO was the expression used. So that is important, also from Turkey's perspective, because European defense is important. European contribution to defense is important. Maintaining a balance in burden sharing is important. But this debate was there for most of the time. I mean, in previous decades also. So it's not a new phenomenon. Now there are promises made. It's important in the future to stock taking how much progress has been made in burden sharing, and support for Ukraine was clearly mentioned. Addressing strategic threats, especially reference to Russia being identified as a primary long-term threat to Euro-Atlantic security, is also at this juncture significant. Terrorism, hybrid threats, cyber attacks, and strategic competition were enumerated as key strategic challenges. So I think that was important. Iran and regional security was referred to, especially that freedom of navigation in Strait of Hormuz, and Iran must not acquire nuclear weapon was mentioned. Innovation and industrial cooperation, launch of NATO front door for industry, strategy for industry, NATO cooperation. In other words, four strategic priorities were laid down. Most importantly, of course, alliance unity and cohesion and collective defense at a time when there were question marks on these. So it was important to bring it back to normal, increasing defense spending, accelerating innovation, and support for Ukraine. These were some of the key issues. So that's, I would say, were the results reflected mostly in this short but meaningful communique and other documents that were adopted in the summit, like Strategy for Industry-NATO Cooperation and launch of NATO front door for industry.
Yeah, great. So, summary, short but sweet. So, it packed a lot in there. And also, of course, it's very important to look at all of the other, let's say take a 360 view of the whole summit, that there are lots of things agreed to outside of the communique, of course, between the allies that were very important for its future trajectory. Okay, so going back to Arda, do you think the deals that were made or in and around the summit were a boost for the European defense industry and therefore strengthening the European leg of NATO? Or were there a lot of deals that were made that were still reflective of the Allies' strong dependence on US equipment and technologies?
Well, were they boost? Yes and no. Yes, definitely, because they reflect the ambition and motivation by European nations, European allies to modernize their capabilities and improve their military preparedness. But no, because their requirements are so huge, so vast, and so qualitatively and quantitatively large that even the amount of contracts, agreements, deals signed or started within the time frame of the summit would not be adequate. In other words, it's just one step in an extremely long ladder towards military preparedness. So, all in all, European nations have a lot of quote unquote homework to do to increase their military preparedness. And there is this common misconception or misunderstanding that military preparedness or readiness equals equipment upgrade and equipment acquisition. No, this is only just one part, but just one part of total military capability upgrade. Other important aspects of it are personnel, in terms of military personnel, in terms of defense industry, human resources, human capital, in terms of infrastructure, also maybe most importantly, the social acceptance of defense and security policies. The position of the general public opinion towards military spending, military programs, defense industry itself, their image, their perception by the general public opinion. Those are extremely crucial factors for the governments to devise, to implement, and to exploit defense policies. So, allocating huge amounts of budget for military procurement programs, signing them, yes, that shows something, that means something, but European nations need to reach a common ground to collectively define their requirements, collectively reach a mutual understanding, mutual collaboration spirit to devise defense capabilities and sustain them. One alarming example has been the FCAS, Future Combat Air System program, run by France, Germany, and Spain. The collapse of the program right before the NATO summit is alarming because it demonstrates the risk of building up, sustaining, and successfully managing a coherent defense capability program which spans several decades, like 20, 30 years of program we are speaking of. Part of it is the combat aircraft, other parts of our drone development programs, guided weapon programs. So there's still something more needs to be done in the European ecosystem within NATO, and procurement or development programs are just part of it. So again, to sum up, yes, there has been boost. There has been boost that it demonstrates Europe's willingness to build up the capability, but there is a lot more to do for the years to come.
Okay, great. Thank you, Arda, for the very clear answer on what needs to be done for sure. So a lot ahead of the alliance, that's for sure. But progress is progress, I guess. So hey, so at least we can remain optimistic on that. So let's go back to Ambassador Diriöz. On the sidelines of the summit, there was a lot of discussion about how the nature of conflicts and the need for constant innovation on the battlefield are changing how the alliance and its member states are looking at defense policy and planning. Do you think that the new measures adopted at the summit will be enough for NATO to keep up with this rapid pace of change?
Yeah. The short answer is yes, it can, but we have to make an effort. Just adopting these are not enough. These are important steps, but whether they'll be enough depends on uh, policies and how they are implemented quickly over time. Because modern conflicts, as was mentioned, demonstrated that the pace of technological and tactical change accelerate dramatically. Capabilities such as drones, artificial intelligence, cyber operations, electronic warfare, space-based systems are advancing in such a fast pace that the alliance cannot rely on defense policy and planning over the long term. We cannot rely on defense policy and planning that were unchanged for decades. So we have to also embed them into our planning and policies. And this requires constant innovation and rapid innovation and adaptation, of course. Just to add a few more comments, um, uh, these initiatives, to be successful, they should be achieved speedily. Should be, as mentioned by Hüseyin Diriöz, industry and collaboration with private sector and technology companies is very important. Faster procurement processes, continued investment in research, experimentation, and lessons learned from ongoing conflicts is important. But again, coming back to doctrine and policy, the ability to adapt doctrine and command structure as quickly and rapidly as technology advances or evolves. That's important. So it should be a beginning rather than, it should be considered as a beginning rather than final solution. We should make an effort. The alliance was always successful, actually, in adapting to the new strategic environment. As we remember, there was Cold War period, Cold War strategy, then end of Cold War, even before the end of Cold War, there was detente period, and detente period required new plannings and policies. Then end of the Cold War period, which ended up with a new strategic concept in 1991, and then there were iterations of that concept, but there were many pillars added to deterrence and defense, like cooperative security, like crisis management pillars. But these, and now we call it NATO 3.0, the 1.0 Cold War, 2.0 post-Cold War, and 3.0 in this unpredictable environment today. And there are some question marks, and we have to put them in order. So steps are taken, but they have to be implemented policy-wise as well, including, of course, this new, as you also mentioned, 360-degree approach. Because threats can affect from all directions, like what happens in Hormuz affects European and Western economic security, stability, the oil prices. So I'm hopeful, but it needs effort, it needs determination, and rapidly to take into stock all these things and translate them into more durable policies and not rely on or decades old policies and plans.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Also, I mean, including the NATO 3.0 part, that it's not just, of course, a complete, the shift to Europe and stronger Europe in a stronger NATO is, of course, an important point, but also reframing these sort of outdated, let's say, Cold War logic or defense policy planning logic, adapting to a new security environment is a major part also of this NATO 3.0, not just, burden shifting, sharing, whatever you want to call it, let's say. So thank you, Ambassador Diriöz. Hey, Arda, I have a similar kind of same question for you, but for the defense industry. So, in the defense industry, did the decisions made at the Ankara summit do anything to sort of move the bar forward in terms of how quickly NATO allies are able to produce and innovate military products and technology?
Well, signals are promising. The mood during the summit was also promising, but I think that is also a matter of time for us to see the outcomes, tangible outcomes, because there's this thing in defense policies. You need to feel the pain. You need to feel the urge in order to diverge all your energy, focus on developing your defense capabilities in terms of industry, in terms of military capability. So, in order to feel that urge, all stakeholders should be on the same page, should be in harmony. So the summit and the discussions that took throughout the summit were encouraging in that sense. But I think it's a little bit earlier for, at least for me as an individual observer, to say that yes, all the road is clear, everything is okay, we are ready to go. It's a little bit early for that. However, especially the defense industry meetings and all the yes meetings that took place throughout the summit were to the point. All the correct decision makers were there. All the correct connections were made, and the overall political support was evident and obvious. Those are very, very strong prerequisites for successful collaboration for the NATO alliance. But then again, I'm trying to see the full half and empty half of the glass at the same time. I think we need to see some developments continue on taking place. But then again, I should underline that the window is closing. So the alliance should act fast and again reach a common ground as soon as possible in order to address the security challenges and risks in a timely fashion.
Okay, great. So, I mean, of course, thank you for highlighting that, of course, these procurement processes need to move a little bit faster, but also political will most importantly, needs to move faster as the sort of essence of behind these movements for NATO. Okay, then let us end there for today. Thank you both for being on the podcast and joining me again to wrap up sort of the conclusions and key takeaways from the NATO summit. Thank you so much, Ambassador Diriöz and Arda.
Thank you, Megan. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. And good day.
Thank you. So again, I'm Megan Gisclon, and you've been listening to Istanbul Policy Center's NATO and Turkey podcast. This concludes our post-summit wrap-up, but if you're interested in more content like this, make sure to subscribe to IPC's YouTube channel or join our mailing list to be notified more about our work. Thank you again, and have a nice day.
Thank you. Have a nice
Thank
day.
you.